right, here we go. Hello, thank you for joining us. I'm Ben Rockwood, CEO and designer at Bainbridge Island Press, and I am very excited today to be joined by my very special guest, Wally Swist, and his new book on today, October 15th, the release day for his new exciting title, Discovering What to Say. Thank you for joining us, Wally.
Well, you are very welcome. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. So, should we start out by having you read the title poem, Discovering What to Say?
I would love to. Discovering What to Say for Father Gabriel Rochelle. You write informing me that you have traced your German surname back to 1100 in Blaubeuren and to two brothers who lived off der Ride or by the swamp reeds. How much like you to provide the exegesis and the argument at once, igniting my memory of our once a week Monday talks in your book-lined study facing High Street, the tops of the heads of passers-by moving to and from classes at the university, when sometimes the very air itself would fill with the intensity of our conversations, the books I would bring, the authors I would introduce from my hours working in the bookstore, and you sharing the depth of your knowledge and your active wisdom, such as how people 40,000 years ago fashioned bone pipes in the caves near Blaubeuren, how these pipes were both discovered and their images reproduced in paintings on the walls, how you facilitate my hearing the melodies of their playing. And because they have nothing to say, but exactly because you and I will always discover what to say and what is most specific to express, like the fires of an idea that can even light up the walls of a cave. Just like that evening, I dropped off a Christmas gift to you of a copy of David Jones, in parenthesis, his book-length poem of fighting in the trenches in World War One, the snow falling as slowly as in a paperweight, and you meeting me at the front door, the hallway lit behind you, intimating the length of the decades we would remain in contact and in friendship, wherein there have been silences that are always filled again with words we needed to say and said them with clarity, not unlike the residents of caves who sat beside the flames of their hearth and blew into their pipes of bone by discovering what they had to say, as we have been trying to leave a trace of the sacred so anyone could clearly see it and begin to listen to it fill the air.
Beautiful poem. Beautiful poem. Thank you for reading it. You're an exceptional reader too. Not all great poets are great readers. You're an exceptional reader.
Well, thanks a lot, Ben. Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about the genesis of this collection. You're a prolific writer. You've written a lot of different collections. What was your thinking when you put together this
This,
manuscript?
this this is a special collection because a lot of my other books are actually longer, over 100 pages, usually over 60 or 65 poems, because I over ever since I won the Crab Orchard Award in the early teens, I really put my shoulder into my work and really felt that longer books were really what I wanted to try to fashion to create. But this book is very special to me in so many ways. There are a lot of homages in the book, and also I took time in accruing these particular poems. I was writing poems regarding Tevis and our journey through Alzheimer's. Um, and so for the past several years, those poems have been my mainstay. Those have been what I've been writing. And then there have been an occasional poem that is not a Tevis poem, not a poem regarding her suffering. And I they had a kind of ethos all to themselves. And as the book accrued, I was thinking of what a good title poem would be, and I thought discovering what to say would be uh, really apt because I had been in touch with Father Gabriel over the course of the last few years, rather frequently. And although I didn't dedicate the book to him, it is the lead poem, it's the title poem. And I think all those Monday mornings when we met and we were trying to figure out what to say and how to think and what to do with our lives. Of course, Father Gabriel's older than I am. He's in his early 80s now, but um, I think that it was as a collection. I'm very fond of the collection, so I think that's how I can answer your question.
Nice. Yeah, it's fantastic. And I will say, in particular, the title is, of course, a publisher's dream, in that
Mhm.
what a universal statement, right? That's all of us are trying to discover what to say on a daily basis. And so it sets the mind to work before you've even opened the first page. And you can't ask for anything better than that. Um, Tevis is essential to you,
Yes.
to these poems, to a lot of your work over the last couple of years. Would you mind telling us a little bit more about Tevis, how you met her, and what your life was like together before it sort of led up to where we are, and whereas we as readers get to interact with her in this work?
Well, we met in 2002, and in January of 2002, the first week, I forget, I think it was the seventh. Um, but in any case, I she was the curator of special collections at the Jones Library in Amherst. So she she curated Frost and Dickinson, among other people. And I had a collection. I had a there were titles of mine in special collections, and people that knew her said to me that I should meet her. So I phoned and made arrangements, and we spoke for about an hour in her office, and it was rather unforgettable. It was we I think we both knew that there were quote unquote great soul movements in at work. Um, there were kind of psychic things that occurred at least early on. I had been invited to deliver a lecture at the Frost Farm in Derry, New Hampshire, regarding the friendship of Robert Francis and Robert Frost. And there was a beautiful poster that was made, and it was cream-colored paper and a green border, and there was only four speakers in the month of August, and two of them were coming from Britain, so the UK. So it was really a terrific thing. And I I went up to special collections, and I there was a you couldn't just walk in. There was a locked door, so I pressed the buzzer, and I had the poster in my hand, and Tevis came to the door with the poster in her hand. She had just
Oh,
received copies at the same time, so things like that were occurring. And there were always synchronicities and psychospiritual events in our lives that were that offered a kind of mysterium tremendum, to be
mm,
honest, a
nicely
kind
said.
of and so we we she was living and we were living in Connecticut at that time. She was in West Hartford and I was in Hartford, and we lived together for a while in West Hartford, and then we both matriculated um, back to well, she was working in Amherst. I then took a job. I was working for an antiquarian bookseller as a cataloger at that time, and I moved to a place of work that was I was a cataloger, and so we at first we were driving up from West Hartford to our separate jobs, and then as it worked out, we we stopped living together primarily because I guess I'll just be truthful. Her mother was an obstacle in our relationship, even though we were in our 50s at the time. We had other relationships, obviously, but we both knew that this was significant. So for several years, we were lovers and our friends, and we continued until her mother's death in the late teens.
Mhm.
And then we started living together again. So it's been about 8 years, including, well, Tevis hasn't been here for 2 years because she's been in Alzheimer's care. But I'm glad that I'm on the tail end, and I've been her caregiver for the last 5 or 6 years.
Mhm.
So it's been a very um, um, unusual relationship in many ways, but it's been very deep. We have it's been it's we have bonds are that are very uncanny.
It seems to take a poet to describe those relationships, and you do beautifully, eloquently, over and over and over again. It's just the bond between you is po poetic. Um,
Well, thank you very
so
much.
tell me a little bit about, what role poetry plays in your day-to-day life. Obviously, at this point, you're spending a lot of time taking care of Tevis and managing the Alzheimer's, which anybody who's known anyone that's been affected by that knows that it becomes essentially a full-time job.
Well, I was when she was here at home. It was indeed a full-time job. I would often write. Actually, I would often translate, to be honest. But I would often write and translate while she was sleeping during the course of the day. She would nap, and but I would make her meals, and of course, we were going to a memory loss therapist at the time for for her. Um, so it was. I did have aides in the house toward the very end of her being at home, but it was unusually challenging in so many ways. There's something known as sundowning, which Alzheimer's sufferers go through. That around sundown, when well, it's sundown and night's beginning to fall, their mood changes to a
Mm,
darker mood, and they're perhaps if they're not combative, then um, they're just more difficult. Um, so I was working through different challenges every day. And now she's in a facility which I go to, and I feed her breakfast every morning. I spend about 2.5 hours, about an hour and a half before breakfast, and then breakfast takes about a half hour, and then another half hour before they have activities. And then that's a decent juncture for me to go. Um, it's always difficult, even especially when we have a good day, or we're in sync as much as we can be in sync at this particular time. It's difficult to relinquish that because we did spend our days together when we were able to, and which was for the most of the last decade was certainly that was the case. But yeah, it's always difficult to let go because one's never sure with this disease.
right.
Um, it's just it's very mercurial in its savagery, a
Yeah,
kind of
definitely.
a kind of quiet savagery in the sense that you mood swings are often very abrupt and is sudden, abrupt, and forceful. So, but I've learned so I it's not that the other thing about Alzheimer's is care is that you can never know enough because the disease morphs so
Hmm.
much,
Yeah.
and your one's always learning. So whatever you've learned today is not thrown out the window at all, but don't expect to bring the same tools, so to speak, in. I never bring that. I never uh, take anything for granted when I get onto the ward. The other thing is that I'm dealing with other patients who are peripatetic and sometimes combative. I'm dealing with her clothes being lost, her glasses being lost. I'm all of those things. I had to deal with. I kept on approaching people back in the spring because she had a wet cough, and I said, "There's something wrong," because I took care of her at home, and I knew the nuances of her um, of her system and her biology, and so I approached maybe four or five different administrators, and nothing was done. Nothing was done
Hmm.
at all. So I kept on bringing cough syrup, but that wasn't doing anything. Well, finally, in June, I received a phone call late on a Sunday night about 9:30, and a nurse had phoned, and she said, "Oh, we did look at Tevis, and two-thirds of her left lung is filled with fluid." So
Mm.
she had pneumonia, and then what didn't go away, it didn't. She was diagnosed with pneumonia in July and then in August. So I sometimes feel I'm not listened to. So it's why I like going in the morning is because I like to be able to advocate. If I need to advocate for her, I will, and I do so as politely as I can. But since I don't usually, I don't, I'm more stubborn in advocating for her than I would myself.
Hmm.
So I sometimes I feel I'm stepping over the line, but I'm not really stepping over a line. It's that
Right.
kind of thing. So
And for our loved ones, who else to do that for than our loved ones, and to advocate when
um,
they cannot, right?
when they cannot and they don't, she doesn't know where she is.
Yeah.
So I mean, I've been working with her the past few days with when she was here and she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. I decided that we should take lots of day trips around southern New England and into Vermont and into the Berkshires. And I chronicled those with taking lots of photographs. And we went through several albums over the last few days, which she really enjoyed. She wasn't sure what they were, and I had to explain. And then we went through them again. And that's something I've learned to do that since she often is repetitive, um, when I'm working with something that might kind of help her memory or spark it, or maybe to keep it going a little while longer, such as looking at photographs or looking at books
Mm.
with photographs in them, plates such as art books, that it's being repetitive is not a bad thing.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So,
Well, I think I'd mentioned to you before that my grandmother had it,
yes.
and watching her go through it. Now, I was going through this from afar. She was in Indiana. I was living in California. I would go and visit every couple of months for a couple of weeks and get to spend a little bit of time with her. She was in a care facility, so I wasn't with her all day long. Um, but it doesn't take very long to be around somebody with it to really notice the impact of it. And I think Alzheimer's is one that is particularly, I mean, there's almost an existential challenge being around it and being
Yeah.
confronted with ourselves in the sense that so many of us, we have this idea that we're going to grow old, and we're either going to just sort of get older and weaker and fall asleep one night and not wake up the next morning. I think it's all of us are hoping is the way it goes. The other is that some accident or some disease suddenly hits us and we sort of waste away. But in all those scenarios, the thing
Mm.
that is constant is that we and our cognitive abilities, who we are, remains intact. And this is the indignity of Alzheimer's, is that being stripped away. And it really suddenly makes you question very much and see a differentiation between what we normally conflate as sort of the intellect and the spirit, right? Our essence and our memory. and that we see the intimate link between who we are and what we remember. And when you
Mhm.
start to tease those apart, it becomes
Yeah.
it becomes deeply spiritual very quickly. Um, and I find it's very challenging to sort of to deal with. And since you're a man of letters and you've written so profoundly, you've also as a translator have a great appreciation. You know, books are ultimately for everything that we have. If it's written in a book, it exists for all time. We have the scrolls and the
Mm.
books from the Greek and Roman era, right? We
Yes. Yeah.
don't have much else. It's fragments of pots and whatnot. You know, these pages are ultimately our memory
Hmm.
and what persists. So, you know, how do you think about that? You've got all these sort of different influences. I'm sure that on a daily basis, you have to have some sort of battles and sort of struggles inside yourself trying to make sense of all this in a sort of larger sense.
Well, I've been writing quite a lot over the last couple of years when Tevis has been in care, and she's been in two facilities. Um, I removed her from one because the level of care went way down, and she fell several times, and she one of the falls resulted in her having a blood clot on her brain,
Mm,
which we had to. She was hospitalized for that, and there's a procedure, and fortunately, they were able to. The verb is pluck it, um, and I was fortunate to move her to another facility. Um, However, with that said, I am rather committed. So I bring books or food, maybe half a blueberry muffin cut up, or fruit that I've sliced for her before I've left in the morning. And I try to change things up, and I'm very committed in communicating with her. So, which includes feeding her breakfast. But what resulted is a kind of psychic um, a response to all of that, with all of the work that I've put into communicating with her. Driving home, usually there's a music of verse coming through, language developing, or an idea, or even sometimes, rarely, a full poem that I can see that's generating in my mind. And then I get back and I work on it. But there are days that I do other things, so I just don't write poetry. But I find that the art of the essay, the essay itself, is a broader canvas, and it's not one doesn't need to be quite as disciplined in the creation of language, because you're using sentences, and they're longer just by their nature, on the page, and it's more of a space in which I can pour out a lot of ideas at once, and I usually write quickly and then go back and revise. But so there's that point, that part. When I feel that I'm between essay and poem, then I I I don't normally go to translation for the sake of filling up my space, because translation, as my friend and colleague Art Beck from San Francisco says, is much harder than writing itself.
mm,
So translation is something that I have great respect for. But it seems that the last few years, during the course of the summer, in the month of August, for God knows what reasons, I seem to have a break in projects and in manuscripts, and I'll go back and translate. Last two summers, I went in and translated a good deal of Rilke's uncollected poems.
mm,
I had known Stephen Mitchell. I was graced to know Stephen Mitchell in New Haven years ago. He was a grad student at Yale, and became one of my mentors, for sure. he often would stop me between classes as we were walking, and we found ourselves walking the same routes. And he would pull out his new Rilke translations from his satchel and show them to me. Students passing on either side, and I love Stephen. So um, I was very honored. Some of the uncollected translations or translations of Rilke's uncollected poems I had in a manuscript, and I had sent them to Green Linden Press, and I didn't win. Cole Swenson won the award in 2025, but I was one of the honorable mention for the Stephen Mitchell Prize for excellence in translation. So I'm kind of holding that dear to me. But we used to meditate together too in the basement of Yale Divinity School Chapel. There was a small group of us who were adherents to Zen, and we would maybe five or six of us, and we would meditate there on a regular basis. So um, I have a kind of wonderful early history with Stephen.
You touched on a million things there I'd love to go into, but for lack of time, I won't dig too much. I am curious about with your translations, that's a big part of your writing. What languages do you translate, and do you stick to poetry, or is it also prose and essay as well?
I don't know. I don't translate prose. I've been asked. There's a fellow who has a press who's asked me to do some translations of prose, but I just don't have the time right now. Um, but no, I studied Spanish, and so I have a real facility. I feel I have a real facility in translating from the Spanish. But because I I was been very fond of the work of Denise Levertov, for instance, and I hosted her. I co-hosted her reading in New Haven years ago in the late '70s, and she 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 translated from the French the poems of Gulubic,
Mm.
um, which were published by New Directions, and she kind of was taken to task a little bit, but because she was Levertov, she didn't. They didn't try too hard to do that, but she used a dictionary, and I think she had someone who helped her with the French. But I did translate Giuseppe Bungaretti's iconic first book, La Allegria. He wrote that in over 5 years in the trenches in World War One, and they're amazing poems. He's a minimalist, um, but for several years, it seems every autumn. I'm not doing that this autumn for sure, um, because of time. But I've gone back to reread someone who was a big influence for me when I was 20. I don't know why that's a watershed year for me, but it is. And I read Ungaretti when I was 20 and loved his work, and spent several years translating La Allegria. And I'm I'm just really I think those poems are just so numinous in so many ways because he has and I think a lot of people don't think that when you think of Ungaretti that he has a spiritual aspect to him, but he does, especially in the poems that um, may not have anything to do about the war per se, but he wrote them. I guess it's also said that he wrote some on, matchbook covers or
Oh wow.
um, right, and it's
In the
just
trenches, you
amazing.
just have to use whatever you've got, right?
Right. So, but
Yeah.
he it's amazing. He survived trench warfare for 5 years. Um, but anyway, that was published by Shanti Arts in 23. I had there are things that happen that you don't submit to and you never thought would occur. But I received an email about 2 weeks ago from a composer in London. He's a young man, he's quite 30. His name is Max Noah. No, Noah Max, pardon me. And forgive me for that. And he is a composer. And he wrote me an email, and he said that someone dear to him gifted him with a copy of my translation of La Allegria. And he he just loved the poems, and he was going to set some to music. So I'm just I'm just it was
That's
thrilling.
incredible.
It was thrilling to hear that anecdote, because it's one of those anecdotes that one, I think, especially as a young writer, you think of, well, what might happen, and what might you like to have happen in your career, and that was a lovely thing.
So that's a
So.
perfect segue. I wanted to sort of go back a little bit to your early days. What got you interested in writing? And I'm sure that you went through a couple of um, different avenues. I'm always curious too, where you maybe hit a point in your career where you decided that prose wasn't for you and you were going to focus on poetry, or if you sort of split the difference. And give us sort of a kind of a quick overview of your early days of writing and influences.
Oh, sure. Well, I wrote for an independent paper, the New Haven Advocate, an alternative newspaper in the 70s in Haven, called the New Haven Advocate. And I wrote for the arts section for about 4.5 years. And I really felt it was important to know how to approach writing a sentence. And a lot of us on I wasn't staff. I was actually assistant manager for 4 years in a bookstore in the Yale Center for British Art. And so that was my day job, and I would write on my own time. But a lot of us at the newspaper, we had our copies of Slouching Towards Bethlehem next to our typewriters, because
Mm,
Joan Didion, writes such a terrifically fine declarative sentence. I mean, so does Hemingway, but I think Didion takes it to a whole new level. And so I also knew a poet. He ended up being the second state poet laureate of Connecticut after James Merrill. His name was Leo Cannellan. And Leo told me once he had submitted a review to the Advocate, and they rejected it. And he said, I can't write a sentence, but I can write a poem. And I
mm,
felt, just for the sake of you know, what one would like to have in one's quiver, as far as tools, it was important to be able to write a sentence, and for it to be a good sentence. Because if you could do that, then you could kind of go through your life,
mhm.
speaking well, and also writing fairly well. So that was I leaned heavily toward that. And interestingly enough, I had always thought that I could, be a full-time freelancer. That's kind of uh, a interesting sentence, oxymoronic. But I did, after I left the book business in my mid 50s, I freelanced for about 10 years, and really enjoyed it. But I like writing prose, and I love the freedom of writing prose. But it's also, there's a discipline. I'm very fond of writers who write poetic prose, for instance.
Yeah.
Jane Ann Phillips, I think, is a good example. Jane Ann Phillips, and also, there's classic writers, such as, oh, I'm trying to think of her name right now. She didn't start writing until after she retired, not unlike Norman Maclean, who wrote A River Runs Through It. Um, but those books are just books to savor. I mean, forever. Those are just beautiful books that are impeccably written. So I've always had my eye on that. However, I think poetry has always been my first love, perhaps. Perhaps it's been a it's as you know, marriages are relationships. They're they have their own rigors and they have their own joys, but um, poetry is more of a marriage or that kind of relationship, and I think prose is something one one does hopefully because one wants to. But poetry is often demanding.
Yeah.
I think a poem demands to be written, and you know, I don't quite. I mean, I know that not to disparage, I'm not disparaging MFA programs, but I think that it's important to have a poem really need to be written,
Mhm.
and to be able to try to accommodate that um, uh, that request. Um,
There's something unique about poetry and its ability to sort of take those choice lines here and there and put them in your consciousness and actually bind and become a part of you. I think as we were saying earlier about the relationship between the sense of identity and self, who we
mm,
are, and memory.
yes. Yeah.
Poetry has a unique way to graft itself in, and I think the other form that we see this in is music, right? Which has the
Yes.
added benefit of having sort of a melody behind it that can catch. In poetry, it's got to find its way into your mind on its own merits. Um, Funny case in point, actually. The other day I was in Costco with Tamara. We were doing some shopping. She doesn't normally go with me. I normally do it. I'm very efficient. She came along, and as we came up on the oranges, I went, the champagne of oranges. And she's like, "What on earth are you talking about? The champagne of oranges?" I'm like, "Cara Cara." Like you
Yeah.
did, it's in here. It's like for the rest of my life, every time I see a Cara Cara orange, I'll be like, "It's the
Oh,
champagne of oranges."
well, thank you for that. Yeah. Well, Tevis loved caracaras, and you know, we would, I would tell her that, you know, this is mid-August, and you know, they're coming from Eastern Washington State, and you know, we have to get some, and she'd be so sad, you know, around December or January when they were no longer on the shelves at Whole Foods. So, you know, it's but they're really terrific.
Oh yeah.
I would garnish her plate um, uh, every breakfast. It got to it got to where I would come down, and I always did come down in the kitchen here and set the table, lay the table. But she would I would allow her to sleep because I felt that was what she needed to do, and she would
Mhm.
come through the louver doors, and I she would say, "Oh, happy
Oh, that's
smiles."
nice. I like that.
Yeah. So yeah, it's
So with that, would you mind maybe reading two or three poems out of your new collection? Some things that are near to your heart and that you think that our
well,
viewers
yes,
might enjoy.
I would. I'd like to read one called "Good Buddhism,"
Ah,
and
yes.
I I hosted Thomas More back in 2004 at the University of Massachusetts for his book Dark Night of the Soul, and
Hmm.
we really hit it off well, and we have remained to be in contact, not in everyday contact for sure, but certainly in touch over the course of the years. Um, and he saw this in a journal, and he had recommended a friend of his. She was writing poems, and he said that you should learn from the poem in the sense that it had something tried to say something, and it was steeped in some personal history. William Ackerman was the founder of Windham Hill Records back in the late 80s or 70s, and after only 4 or 5 years, he decided that he was not a CEO,
Mm.
and he left. But Tevis and I were in Brattleboro, Vermont, going to antique stores, and I saw this fellow on the street, and I swear that it was William Ackerman because he was, Wyndham Hill Records was named after Wyndham County, Vermont. In any case, this is called
Nice.
Buddhism. Good Buddhism for William Ackerman. We'd see you always seated next to your accompanist, Saturdays, late morning, in front of the music store, at the bottom of Main Street in Brattleboro. But it was you, wearing the fingerless gloves those winter days, how you made the notes bounce off the red brick buildings on either side of the street, with the purposeful and slow picking of your guitar strings. I hadn't known then who you were, but recognized something in you just the same as you looked up in your stocking cap, smiling at us walking past, at ease with playing in public anonymously. Later, when I found out it was you who had founded Wyndham Hill, our seeing you all came together, especially when I discovered your New England Roads CD, which we now meditate with every morning. I realized that it was you that we saw playing as the snow fell deliberately by degrees, the same way in which you pluck your strings, delighting in the good Buddhism of the moment and deepening what is that that is resonant, lingering as snowflakes do, and the notes you play in nourishing all those who become present enough to listen.
Yeah, I love that. It's a nice introduction to Buddhism too. You're a student of many schools of religious thought. How did you become originally acquainted with and interested in particularly the Eastern religions? Was it through some of the common methods in the 70s that were disseminating, or did you come in contact with it at the university?
Yeah, both, a little bit of both. Of course, I read, I read in my teens, I read Kerouac, and of course there was Dharma Bums and J.P. Ryder, aka Gary Snyder,
Hmm.
and I I was I was alerted to Buddhism. However, I had gotten a job in a bookstore that was right next to Yale Art and Architecture Building. It was called Book World, and sales reps would come in, uh, and it was a small store, but we had more overstock downstairs than we had upstairs, and the aisles were they were not they were not to fire code, but the owner would give cookbooks to the New Haven fire chief for his wife, and that was just waved off. But in any
Every
case,
good library ultimately is a fire hazard.
right, and so it was a really good bookstore, and I worked with a fellow who he had taught at the University of Wisconsin, and he was involved in the anti-war protests back in the late '60s, and um, he the FBI cornered him for whatever reasons. He was a very nonviolent man, but after they had grilled him, he had a nervous breakdown, and he was a
Mm.
very wonderful man, kind of a bear of a guy, and he he was involved in this meditation group with along with Stephen Mitchell. The both of them had founded the New Haven Zen Center. There's also a professor from the psychology department at Yale who was working on a paper of regarding meditation and madness or
Mm.
schizophrenia, and how meditating would at least um, um, uh, bring the possibilities or open to possibilities of healing.
Mm.
So anyway, um, Ed, his name was Ed Bednar. He was also studying on his he was trying to finish his dissertation on D.H. Lawrence, and he had written everything. He was working with Harold Bloom, and
Oh wow.
he well, Bloom had come into the store, um, and he was a force, and
Yes, he
he
is.
woke yeah he woke up.
I'm a Bloom junkie. We actually have on
Yeah.
our wall in our living room on a chalkboard, we wrote out all the books of the Western canon, and it's the playlist for all of our
Right.
family. You have to read through the playlist. But anyway,
Well,
he's a man.
well, of course, he would get up at what 3 or 4 in the morning, and he would write. And I actually lived on it was I forget the name of the street now, but it was right in back of the Payne Whitney gym, and I would walk into campus that way, and he would be sauntering down the street, looking up at the sky, and there were trees that had just been planted on within the concrete, and squares of soil, and I always wondered how he didn't run into any of the trees, but he never did. But he was deep in thought.
Mhm.
Um, he was a wonderful character, and of course, a terrific literary figure. But anyway, Ed took it upon himself to, as he said, to take me by the collar. He was about 10 years older than I was, so he said to me that I was going to practice Buddhism with, in his with his group, and he recommended a lot of books. So he was a very fine friend and teacher. It's interesting. About 25 years later, I was actually reading at Yale Bookstore. I worked at Yale Bookstore too, but in any case, I was reading at Yale Bookstore. I think it was my first full-length collection, and it was arranged by the publisher. It was a Connecticut publisher, and I walked into the bookstore, and there was a book by John Hollander in one of the windows, and then my book in the other. And I knew there was no parody, but it was just it was just a terrific thing. But so I was reading there, and Ed happened to come in, and he was smoking his pipe, of course, and we had coffee afterwards. But he was very proud of me. He was an older brother whom I loved very much.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. But so I had these wonderful I had these wonderful uh, individuals who provided lots of inspiration for me, and it was a terrific it was a terrific coming of age. Uh, uh, I came from my mother died when I was 8, and my father remarried, and it was not a good marriage. Um, my stepmother was an alcoholic, and she locked me out of the house at night.
Oh no.
So, yeah, I was an honor student who was locked out of the house at night. So it was a difficult um, coming of age from as a teenager. But I got to New Haven, and that was really I had lots of fine influences, and I just didn't look back.
Mm.
I just I tried to I think I consciously tried to take all the goodness of that with me.
Now, tell me a little bit about how you think of sort of Western and Eastern religions. We see this in a couple of your different poems. You sort of going back and forth between the two of
Yeah,
them, and there's
yeah.
certainly places where there's some places you can bring together synergy, and other places that we don't. For instance, I tend to think that a lot of what we have in sort of the Eastern religions is a much more present sort of mentality,
Yeah,
right?
right.
Particularly like through the Four Noble Truths and the playing out of the
Yes,
Dharma, and ultimately that
yeah,
like now is what matters, right? Whereas in
yeah.
Western religion, we're much more focused on a future point in time and sort of the world to come, and then we work backwards from that as to what that means. So there's
Well, yeah,
this juxtaposition between the two that can play out in a couple of different ways, and I'm curious how you sort of come together to reason about this because you use both sort of almost interchangeably in your poetry.
I do, and I think it may be, and I say this really carefully. It's not. I've used the term comfort zone, but I feel comfortable. Maybe I should portray it this way. I feel comfortable not interchanging them, but because they're quite different as you're pointing out. Um, I, there have been different stages for me of practicing presence
Mm,
and as a discipline. So I can break it down into practicing. Well, I can break it down this way: is for about 10 years, I did something. Tevis found the book, and it was the only time I was ever um, um, wanting something that she had that I didn't have. But she found a book by Eva Pirakos, regarding the guide lectures, and
mm,
she had channeled this. Um, we don't know what gender the guide was, but this guide, and for about 10 years or 15 years, maybe from the early 50s to the early or mid 60s, there were meetings with her group in New York City, and the guide, she channeled these, and they were recorded. Um, and I really got into the guide lectures. I think there's something like 250 of them, and
mm,
it's pretty much it's high octane spirituality. You have to really let go of previous belief systems, and it's thinking that's heavily leaning towards Eastern thought,
mm,
um, that kind of thing, and I would call it progressive Christianity. But it's interesting because my friend Art Goodtimes, who is a San Franciscan who has been living in Colorado for the last 40 years. He he commented on an essay of mine I just published called Christness. Um, it's not being Christ, but it's it's being open to being Christ-like. Uh,
mhm,
and he said that of all my essays, he loved that essay, but he said, I'm not into Christianity. And here's somebody who was um, he was in he was in um, he was in seminary with Jerry Brown.
mm,
He and Jerry Brown were good friends, and they both um, dropped out of seminary in their junior year, and they did other things. And Art has been a longstanding friend of mine since the early 70s. But in any case, so I guess what I'm trying to portray is, I think that especially now, I think for um, trying to portray that I'd never portray that I'm a Christian, but I have Roman Catholic roots, and it's hard, whatever your roots are, to not, you can't disown them, because
mhm,
they're really part of you. I think you can grow and do other things, and still honor those roots, even if you think that they may be pejorative in regard to other spiritual practices. Not pejorative, that's probably not the right word to use, but I think that in today's, especially political world, um, let me just say that Tevis and I um, have been great admirers of an English author who has written very wonderfully about awakening.
mm,
And I'm trying to think of his name right now, but he we read about 7 books in one spring and summer. I read them aloud to Tevis, and Steve Taylor is his name, but do look into his work because he's quite
mm,
remarkable. I think he teaches at the University of Leicester, in the UK. But he wrote regarding the evangelical movement that, in one sentence, he said, the evangelical movement is not a religion. And I think that that really is such a powerful sentence because I firmly believe that it isn't. I know that that might be incendiary, but I think that we have to be careful about what in my I published this essay called entitled Christness in Today's American Catholic, and the editor Michael Centauri um, wrote me and he said that he liked what I did in the essay with respect to Christness and what it is and what it isn't.
Yeah.
And I think we need to know, we need to keep in mind of what it isn't. And I think that spiritual fraud is a terrible thing.
Oh yeah.
Um, it's
There's a lot of movements that eventually sort of go off the rails given enough time. And of course, we particularly when we take different systems and put them together, we naturally find parallels that often don't fit. I think one of the most I struggled with Buddhism for a long time and really trying to understand it well because there were these different sort of schools, the American school and then sort of the classical school. And I think one of the moments that was most useful to me was the Dalai Lama was in
mm,
London giving the
mm,
giving the talk and to a completely packed Royal Albert Hall, completely packed to the
mm,
brim.
mm,
People just absolutely, foaming at the mouth with excitement that the Dalai Lama was there. And
right.
somebody, it became question and answer time, and somebody gets up and she says, Dalai Lama, tell us about God. And he stops and he thinks and he looks up and he goes, I don't know. The whole room was just like, as Westerners, we don't wait. You're supposed to tell us about God and the afterlife and all this. And it's like, nope, nope, that's not my business. And they lost their mind. It was like you could just see all these people were like, I can't comprehend, right? And it was just this. You could see somebody who was brought up and steeped in Christianity, who then saw a little bit of sort of a couple of factions of Buddhism, and then put those two things together and could not let them go. And
Right.
to hear it from the one source that could
Yeah.
definitively say it just could not handle it. But I thought that was deeply informative, and you see this in I think all kinds of other moments where there's this moment where something good goes a little too far off the rails, and Western history is completely steeped with that. I do love though anytime somebody does call us back to our roots, and so I think essays like yours are important. They have to happen, I think, at regular intervals to challenge us. I mean, the word Christian is so packed full of meaning and connotations and good and bad childhood experiences and
Right.
all sorts of things, right? But ultimately, all
Right.
it means is little Christ, right? A follower of
Yeah.
Christ.
Right.
And if there's any one thing about, I think, certain figures, the Buddha being one, Christ being another, there's, no matter what you think about what came after them, their teachings alone are so simplistic and so pure. It's really hard to put any cracks in it, right? I mean, how do you say I don't like what Christ said? You might not like Christ, you might not like his followers, you might not like what
Right.
came, but
Right.
he said love one another and get along. It's pretty hard to fight with that. And so always challenging ourselves to go like, hey, we keep putting stuff on, keep putting stuff on. Let's keep it free so that we can sort of see things for what they are and reevaluate them with fresh eyes rather than just the experiences that we've gone through is always, I think, important.
Yeah. All of that is rather eloquently stated, and true. I believe truthfully so. Yeah. But with reference to my own, I don't believe I interchange. I think I focus on one or the other because one or the other seems to be appropriate in the poems. So I
Yeah, and to maybe illustrate more what I mean. And we're getting to an hour here, so I'd love to have you read one or two poems. But we have,
sure.
Meditation Basement Yale Divinity School Chapel, which you kind of
Oh yes.
mentioned earlier. Washing of the Stones, Rose of Sharon,
Hmm.
The Feather of Angels, The Calling. I really enjoy. You got Good Buddhism, which you read earlier. Um, the angel numbers, I really enjoyed that. That was really clever, and
Oh,
and
thank you.
and fun to read. Seeing poems with interesting structure is always great. You just so I don't know that I've seen you maybe intermix within a poem, but certainly one I think who picks up one of your books and flips through would have a hard time walking away with a firm understanding, except that you're exceptionally skilled and knowledgeable across different systems.
Well, I think would you have of those that you just mentioned something that you'd like me to read? Um,
Mm,
Washington Stone's Rose of Sharon.
Rose of Sharon's great.
Okay. Um, this is prefaced with a quote from Harper's Bible Dictionary. Hibiscus syriacus, a kind of crocus growing as a lily among the brambles. The distinctive mauve of your petals is reminiscent of the color of a courtesan's lipstick, the shade of which makes a tawdry drunkard stumble. 5 petals of dark pink, almost purple, forming around an enlarged pistil, is in the very center of your flower. Your bloom is prolific from May through September. You are lavish, even lovely. Your color appears to suggest beauty, must go astray to proliferate, as so much so as you do, since you usually bloom at night. To think of you doing so in the sheerness of moonlight is to intimate you are a result of a tryst with the best of yourself and your shadow. That is not unlike ourselves on our better days. By morning, you are only more promiscuous in daylight, your preponderant blossoms tipped cups brimming with dew, reinvigorating our imagination of your sustained rose flush implies that your shade is not only a color to savor, but also by drinking it in, we come to know the headiness of the taste of your uncommon wine that comes of age in our fields and whose branches announce you by bending halfway to the ground, making you appear to be the tree of languishing kisses, whose flowers resembled puckered lips awaiting to be kissed.
Because I think it might be a wonderful one to sort of go on that. And it always reminds me of Carlos Williams, Button Box. Would you mind reading
Oh,
that?
no, I would love to.
And I
Yeah,
think with all the serious things we've talked about in this, maybe end on a lighter lighter point.
I agree. Button box, the round tin that once contained the holiday rum cake, which was always shifting with the festive load of my mother's buttons. Varieties and sizes of deep, rich colors, chocolate browns, pomegranate reds, sporty dark blues, all of them sliding over each other at just a touch, making a rushing sound. Sometimes the silver surface at the bottom flashing so that it became a mirror, and you could see yourself momentarily surprised to seem so avid in your delight. I remember placing my hands amid the buttons and allowing them to stream through my fingers, one after the other, feeling the satisfaction of their diversity, their utility, their charm, and trying to guess which one might be used next, to be sewn into a sleeve or attached to a collar or added to a winter coat, the deep greens, the azures, pearls, to be able to reach in and hold them while my mother sewed, calculating where they might go, cook up some of the best and my most hallowed of my boyhood hours.
Yeah, I love that poem. Thank you so much. I like to say one of the ways I evaluate poetry that's really important to me is just that it's a
Mm,
great poems start with me but end with we. That you,
mm,
as the poet, are inviting me into your experience because it's our shared experience. And this is one of those that maybe this is going out of style because there are fewer people who sew, but I know exactly what you're talking about. Exactly what you're talking about. I know
mm.
moving aside the buttons, looking for something specific, seeing something neat, seeing your reflection in the bottom of that old, cookie tin, and Yeah, it's hard. It just brings back the holidays to me reading this. This is a great one, I think, to sort of read around the hearth with the family. And yeah, thank you for sharing that. I mean, this is something that is so simple as to be maybe trivialized, but this is the true heart, right? At the end of the day, this is
Yeah,
what real
mm,
life is, and what
I
makes
think
it
so.
so special.
Well, thank you very much. It's been such an honor for you to publish this book. I really am very, very appreciative. Um,
Well, thank
and
you. We love it. We're so glad that we got to work with you on it. So, I mean, I guess as we come to the top of the hour here, the last thing to ask is, what's next for you?
gee, what's next? Well, to be honest, I've been working on a set of essays called "Wood and Nails: Caregiving as Spiritual Practice." So it's
Mm,
a relatively short book of essays. They're 14 pieces, and I had a contract with a Boston publisher 2 years ago, and then we were working on what would have been final proofs and some changes, and I knew I couldn't go on because my level of caregiving took precedent here, and I pulled the contract, and I think we'll just leave it at that. But I got back to this past spring and summer, and I um, tightened and not finesse, but tightened and revised, honed some of the essays that weren't published, and they were accepted in a variety of magazines. So I'm sending that out now, and I'm really looking to publish that. In my mind, I'm thinking that I might, if there's any one book that I would, hang my reputation on, then I would be that book. It's an important book for me. So, throughout the book, there may be a part of a poem or some translation, but it's mostly prose. And I so that book is that's a major project, which is I'm considering finished. And then I have two books of translation, which I have hopes for. Ode to a Violin in California and Other Necessary Odes is of Pablo Neruda. I've translated a number of
mm.
Neruda's odes, and they've appeared in some decent places. Of course, Neruda's been overly um, translated to some degree, but then again, I do have a collection of so a selection from Rilke's Book of Hours being published by, it's a book length, it's not a chapbook, from Finishing Line Press that's going to be out in about a month or so. Um, but I have a much larger collection of Rilke um, from his uncollected poems, and that's called Wild Rosebush, and I'm very excited about that. So I have at least three big projects. That,
You've got a lot of irons in the fire. I mean, you've got so much already in your bibliography and so much more to come. Um,
well, thanks.
well, we're excited for all it all. So thank you so much for taking the time to
Yeah,
join us. It's been a fascinating conversation. The book
and
is available today. October 15th is the official publication date. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, on our web store, and,
mm,
or, even better, go to your favorite independent bookstore and ask them to special order it and put a couple extra copies on the shelf. So thank you, Wally. Thank you so much for joining us.
and thank you.
Awesome.